Outside the gates of a monastery is a woman named Elizabeth. Elizabeth is on her third day of food strike outside the gates of this monastery. She's been denied by the nuns, but will do anything it takes to get in, even if it kills her. I'll come back to the story about Elizabeth in just a moment, but already from this little information, most of you are probably trying, consciously or not, to put Elizabeth into a box. Is she an activist? Is she homeless? Is she desperate or determined? Is she black or white? And would the color of her skin make a difference in your perception? Some say that the human species has evolved in large part through the ability of storytelling. The stories that we've told have divided us into groupings, us against them, which in turn has helped us collaborate, build amazing things, and move society forward. So one might say that the need to put each other into boxes is kind of our evolutionary heritage. But I don't think people fit into boxes. How I see it, our species has kept growing, transforming, intertwining, and now I believe that the way that we interpret the stories, how they shape how we view both ourselves and others, needs to transform as well. Let me give you a glimpse into the lives of 3 of the people who helped me come to this conclusion. When Elizabeth was young, she was still called by her birth name, Kabunda. Kabunda grew up in the extreme poverty village of Nambuata in the western part of Zambia. This is the type of village where most people die from either malnutrition, disease, or childbirth. Most children aren't allowed to go to school, and among those who do, they're often pulled out after 1st or 2nd grade. It takes several hours to walk to and from school, and when you're struggling for survival, with the daily crisis for food and water, taking this time to go to school can seem both meaningless and like a waste of time. But Kabunda, she had a superpower. She had her father, and he was determined for her to study for as long as possible, even if it took a large toll on the family. You see, he was the most educated man in the village. He had graduated from 3rd grade, and he had a prestigious job as a janitor, which in today's money earned him about $1 a day, the definition of extreme poverty. But which of course isn't much, but at his job, he also got to see people with other types of lives, what he believed to be better lives. And he knew the key for his daughter to also reach such a life was through education. But life isn't as easy as that. Her education made her wiser, but none the richer. Her education just wasn't translating into food on the table. So when she was done with primary school, she was still unemployed and starving. But she was also a Catholic. So she decided she would become a nun. A good and prestigious life for someone of her upbringing. But she'd been denied by the nuns. And that is how she ended up here, outside the gates of the monastery on her 3rd day of food strike, willing to do anything it takes to get in, even if it would kill her. Maria steps in through the door of her 250 square meter house close to the city center of Lund in Sweden. She's finished a shift as the head doctor at the pediatrics emergency in the city's university hospital, one of the best hospitals in the country. Today has been a good day. And it's also her last day before summer vacation. So when she gets home, she pours up a glass of sparkling rosé and heads to the garden patio where her husband and children are playing, while setting up a grill for tonight's barbecue dinner. Maria's family consists of an older daughter from a previous relationship, her husband of 20 years, and 3 young children, all of them 4 years apart. In a few days, they're going for a 2-week vacation to the idyllic Italian island of Elba to enjoy their amazing beaches, pizzas and pastas, wines and coffees, and more. For all intents and purposes, Maria's life seems pretty idyllic. And in many ways, it also is. Both her and her husband, Andreas, are highly educated. She even has a PhD within medicine, and they both have high-income jobs. They also have 4 children who they love more than anything in this world, and they're living in their dream house. Their lives really do seem perfect. But remember Maria. I'll come back to her in a moment. Said lives in Malmö in Sweden. He's laying down, looking up at the stars and thinking. When Said was just a small child, his father was deported from Sweden. He doesn't even remember his father's face anymore. He's often saddened by the fact that his father never came back to visit him or asked for him to come visit his father in Morocco. In fact, Said's father disappeared, and he never heard from him again. Or that's actually a truth with modification, because he did manage to reach out to his father once as an adult and managed to receive an invitation to come visit him in Morocco. But when Said arrived, no one was there. He had given him the wrong address and never responded to him again. Maybe Said's life would have been fine anyway, even without his father, but it isn't. Said doesn't blame his mother for letting him get away with skipping school from a young age, smoking from the age of 10, that she would protect him from the police whenever he was in trouble for shoplifting or stealing bikes. His mother had a tough childhood too, with questions of her own origin. You see, she was one of the adopted Finnish children who were orphaned after the war. So it wasn't strange for Said that she was afraid of conflict or had a hard time knowing whether to be parent or friend. But nonetheless, it, together with all of his choices, led him here, on a park bench, homeless, high on heavy drugs, looking up at the stars and thinking. Once, he was actually really handsome and charming, and many people adored him for his kindness and empathy. But now, if you pass him by in the streets of Malmö, all you might see is a mentally ill, homeless drug addict. So the stories that I've told you are of 3 very different types of people with 3 very different narratives, and I assume that most of you have also put them into very different boxes. So why have these 3 people's lives affected how I believe we need to divide us and them, how that division needs to be transformed? Well, while they seemingly have very little in common, they do in fact have one pretty big thing in common. Me. They are my grandmother, mother, and father. And so I ask of you, does this change your mental image of Maria? Or did you imagine the highly educated medical doctor with a seemingly perfect life to also be a woman of color with a very unusual background? And me? I'm from 5 countries. I'm from Sweden, Zambia, Finland, Germany, and Morocco, with a combination of both upper and lower class. And I don't know how many times I've responded to the question, "What ethnicity are you?" with an awkward, "Well, that's kind of a complicated question." What I really am is a clear byproduct of the multicultural transformation that our world is undergoing. I usually joke and say that I'm the future. Soon everyone will be like me. We're just not quite there yet. All my life, I've carried my family's group identities within my own narrative. But we still live in a mostly black and white world where things such as religion, class, ethnicity still play a large role in how we divide us and them. For me, this has meant that during most of my own life, I have both idolized and looked down upon almost every part of my own heritage, depending on what group I identified the most with at that particular moment. All my life, or most of my life, I really felt this divide within myself. And that was true, but I realized that seeing your self-identity that way always makes you feel like less than. And it helps uphold this unnecessary illusion that there is a divide to begin with. And I'm no expert, but I can see how in broader aspects, in cities, in countries, this divide also causes both massive segregation and intolerance. I mean, all of these narratives were forced upon me, and I could barely build a bridge between them within myself. And that really was the case until I realized I didn't have to buy into a story that divided my narratives. So one day, I decided to let go of everything that I thought was right and wrong about the people around me, everything that I thought defined them, and started to listen and try to truly understand them. And once I managed to let go of everything I thought defined them, I could finally see how they defined themselves. And it not only made me feel empathy for and understand them, it expanded my whole perspective as well. I learned about thoughts and feelings that I hadn't even considered before. And what else? They started understanding and seeing my perspective too. So instead of there being a big divide between us, we had now built a bridge. So one thing that my heritage has taught me is that life is like a deck of cards, and we have no control over what cards we're given. We are all just people trying to do the best we can with them. It's almost like we've been told this story or some rules to a game of life, and then we just mindlessly follow. But I've realized one thing. I have realized that while we don't get to choose whether to be a part of this game or not, we do have the possibility to choose how we play it. So I've decided I want to help build a new story, a new and more inclusive story, a story where we stop seeing people for who we think they are and start seeing people for who they really are. And from my experience, the best thing about seeing other people's perspectives is that it brings empathy and tolerance. And empathy and tolerance weighs so much less than grudges and intolerance. And it's so much easier to be your best self when you're not also focused on the shortcomings of other people. So I urge us all to share our stories, but most of all, listen. Be curious and listen to other people's stories. Really try to understand them and the lens through which they view the world, without our own biases affecting us. And if we find ourselves falling back into forming biases or stereotyping, and trust me, no matter how good our intentions are, it will happen. So let's not feel bad when it does. Then let's just reflect upon why we formed them. And without judgment, allow ourselves to change our minds and let them go. Because by listening to other people's stories, we can understand them. And when we understand them, we can build bridges. And that can truly transform the way we view the world and the people around us. I want to end by finishing the story of my grandmother, Kabunda. Where we left off, she was sitting outside the gates of the monastery. Since I'm standing here today, I assume most of you have already guessed she didn't become a nun. She was, however, led into the monastery. But after a few weeks, the nuns told her that they thought her life had other things in store for her. And they did. A few years later, fate brought her to Sweden, where she earned her PhD in sociology. When she came back to Zambia, she worked herself up to becoming the first female minister of education of Zambia and founded FAWE, Forum of African Women Educationalists, that works towards equality and equity in education across the African continent. So when you leave my talk, leave knowing that the little girl from extreme poverty, the young woman who sat starving outside the gates of a monastery, transformed her life and became a minister of education. So when we view people, let's let go of our preconceptions and listen. You see, people usually don't fit into our boxes, and their stories might actually surprise us. And maybe then we can stop seeing people for who we think they are and start seeing people for who they really are. Thank you.